Everybody.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I just wanted to say before we get into the talk or the discussion, conversation, however you receive it, is it's inspirational and I speak from my heart, so we'll just go from there. So in spiritualism, what the lifelong lesson has become, there are no coincidences, right? Everything is a little more synchronistic than we can be aware of. So the song precedes my thought, and that's where a little bit of the dialogue is going to be. It's about the storytelling piece. But before we get into the storytelling piece, the characters change, but perhaps the play never changes. And it is an interesting fact, from coming from a different continent, growing up in a different set of circumstances and dispositions, the characters are playing the similar roles in this side of the continent. The storylines are still the same. They haven't really changed much. But the characters definitely have something to do with it. You know, things change and stories somewhere remain the same. So the storytelling is an interesting fact of our development as a medium, a psychic, or even as a human being. Because sometimes telling story is fun, and sometimes the story itself can be very interesting, right? Because even in the dictionary, telling story could mean various things. It could mean the reality, or it means the fabrication of whatever that is. So there's a little construct of that, right? So my morning, aha, in a small way, was like a kick in my shin. Has anybody ever been a villain in their stories? We have all lived many stories in our lives so far, but have we ever been the villain in our own stories? It's an interesting observation. Have we? And I feel that there is not a real sense of an answer here, because it's something to think about. And it was a kick in my shin, because I was like, oh, it's interesting. I now have to go on all day long thinking about peeling the layers of my own self and figuring it out if it has ever been applicable or it's just a thing. So the laws of perception says anything that is perceived is a sense of reality, right? To the receiver that is receiving the sense of perception is a sense of reality. So the laws of perception are just allowing us to see a starting point somewhere in the construct of things. And what goes beyond that point is very interesting. So there are a lot of fillers, right? And the fillers are the construct of, it can be imagination, it can be tying in little pieces of what we know instead of knowing things in entirety. So there is a lot of fillers that goes on to perceiving a set of outcome, etc. Right? So that sense of perception is an interesting thing. How I perceive myself in my own story could be much different even in today's reality of you being in the audience, receiving that sense of perception about my participation. Right? So that goes there. Here I am thinking I'm doing 100% best, and over there you could be thinking, like, oh no, he's not. But that's just the sense of it. So that is the allowances knowing is what is my perception bonding with to create those fillers. Could it be my own sense of my own journey for so many years that I've lived, the experiences that I've had, the realities, or myths or misconceptions that I've experienced for myself. So that is a valuable sense of rising, because I'm recognizing this thought's going to be with me not just for today, it's going to be there for a long time. Because there have been parts in my life where the story, just like in your own lives you have story, you have perceived others to be the villain in your story. There are definitely others that make the cut, but do you make the cut of being a villain in your own story? It's so much easier to be the hero, or that place of point of focus where it's a whole different construct. But I'm pretty sure I have made it a few lists of being a perceived villain, but I don't see it that way because I'm not the villain. Right? Doesn't it make interesting thought? And the part of that is where all this is stemming from, or where it's coming from. We really don't understand that part, but at the same time, understanding the laws of perception is only a starting point. Everything else beyond that point, unless it's factual, very documented, designated historical truth, everything can be perceived or assumed beyond that point as a filler. So in the development of our abilities as spiritualist mediums, or just mediums, let's just leave the spiritualist word alone at the moment, just being as a mediums or gifted healers or psychics, there's a lot that is going through our perceptive value of receiving the sensory information that we hear, by touch, by sensing, by vision, by inner clairaudience, etc. We're still not hearing verbatim to what that is. We're picking bits and pieces, and we have to make sense of it. So it happens in our lives. We are finding ourselves in a corner with a life situation, etc. We start putting things together. Rarely it is a space where you get start to an end dialogue somewhere. You have to make sense of things. And that's just how things are. Because life, in some way, is a sense of fractal. Because it comes in fragments, it has to be filled by other aspects that are at play. So since everything is interconnected with each other, we all are playing roles in our own vibrational spaces with other characters in our stories. And how they are perceiving impacts us as much as what we are perceiving impacts them. So there's always this cause and effect or sense of play that goes on, is there. So in the abilities of your life, of our lives, we have to recognize there are other things at play. I may not be in control in its entirety of the outcome of my perceived sense of reality. It may be slightly left, slightly right, slightly shorter, slightly later, but we have to recognize that. And as I'm receiving the thoughts that I'm receiving, I have to understand that I have to stand in my wholeness in this receptivity. And that's where, for me, I'm just a medium or a conduit of letting this information pass. It's not coming through my own cognitive space. It's arriving and it's just being passed on. But I become a character in today's storyline of this service. So it is important for me to be present, and that's where my journey has somewhere revealed to me, especially I will give credit to coming into spiritualism, it has brought me much closer than I ever was to myself. It has become a space of self-inquiry. I've always been a curious kid when it comes to religion and practices and beliefs and rituals and everything. I've done a lot of them myself because I like to practice and see for how it feels. So I have stayed up at 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning and done my sitting in silence and looking for that unknown that I'm looking for. I've done all those things just to experience what it feels like. That way I can tell my story rather than listen to somebody's story and make sense of it for myself. So the golden rule that you just quickly recited today says, do unto others as others should do unto you. So in that story, next time when you're feeling the hero, maybe the other facet of that is to perceive yourself, oh, am I being a villain in somebody else's story? Let alone that, or in my own story, can I be that part? And that might be a little shift in the perceptive sense to see a different facet of that whole storyline. So to work as a gifted individual, sometimes we have to take on the imprints of the afterlife, what we had gone through, what they have dealt or experienced, or what it felt like physically going through a journey. So there's a lot of sensory value that goes through us as a conduit to be able to give what we give. But at the same time, that becomes a little song and dance of excitement. Because we were talking earlier in the refreshment room, it's just the template. This is not a template work. This is an individualized sense of communication and work. And you have to realize, whoever you're dealing with, could you generalize every experience with each individual that you're dealing with? Could you generalize that? There are special people, there are some somewhat special people, and there are not so special people in your life. So you can really not generalize everything in one package with everybody. You have to dole it out to whatever is applicable. Still, very honestly saying, is it based on your perception or what it is? So to tell the story of my journey of my life is not such a easier way to unfold that yet. I have to recognize when I'm standing in an oratory faculty or space, speaking space, things are passing through me and evoking parts of the subtle silent kind within myself that needs to be investigated. So that evaluating or self-evaluation becomes a very strong thing. I have to live my words as soon as I'm done with them. So my choices become to be more silent. It's an escapism, is it really? No. Because in silence, the mind or my presence with myself is much deeper. And it is more happily catastrophic, if I could say that, because it still is allowing to peel my own subconscious and unconscious mind to go through that experience. But I don't expect others to be in the same place because they are living their own story. So, golden rule, let them do their thing while I enjoy doing my thing. Nothing is above, nothing is beyond. And what I will say is, through the journey of a self-inquiry, I have become a little bit more detached with a sense of judgment. I still perceive things, so I'm not saying I'm above all. I still perceive things, but I have started to feel over a few years that my sense of judgment is kind of leaving my sight. I may make an assessment, I may make an evaluative statement, but that judgment to me I feel is a whole different frequency, and it is slightly feeling diminished. I'm not saying I'm perfect or I haven't mastered it, I don't have an expectation of it, but at the same time it has removed itself slightly from me. And I think that brings me to the full circle of saying, maybe I will start to see myself in both ways. Am I the hero or am I the villain in my sense of story? So, what are you going to do with that information? That would be the question. But please make it valuable for yourself as you may perceive it. However, I would say very inspirationally, it is a powerful thought. Because we all like to be heroes. None of us like to be the villain. And that's okay. So as you pick it up for yourself, see where that has been. Maybe there is an unfoldment of a different kind that awaits us. So what happens when we are dwelling far too beyond into the spirit side of life? It is a whole different stimuli of its kind, right? Everything is in the mind, everything is in the brain chemistry of life, and I talk about that very generously because I do believe through my own experiences I can shift myself. So get there and come back needs the buffering space. So oftentimes after the message service or documented conversation, somewhere I have to make sure I'm in and out of that space. So to each their own, but at the same time I have to find a little happy place for me to return to me before I go into the next commitment. And I would say that, think about it, how many times life is just moving so fast and we are somewhere living the perception and reality both at the same time because one is happening, the other one is following through, or vice versa. Are we really getting a break to separate everything and get to ourselves? Once again, it's easier said than done. So I would like everybody to feel inspired to try that. How do I return to myself? How do I find to get back to myself? Whatever it is, glass of water, walking outside, going outside, taking a deep breath, or just melting, having a melting down moment in your chair, because the reality of life, the responsibilities of life are not backing off. They're going to pursue regardless of where we are, how we're feeling. They will wait for us till we get to them or they get to us first. It's a very competitive field of responsibilities and outcomes. So nothing is going away, but we have to figure out a moment to be with ourselves. We all have the same 24 hours, and that's a wonderful reminder of one of our own, Reverend Marilyn Artree, when we are in conversation. She would say, we all have 24 hours. What we do with it becomes our own personal business. And that's part of me is like, that was a thought she has provided on several conversations, but as I speak to you, as being brought to my mind, we have to make time to get back to our own reality. Otherwise, could we be living in a sense of perceived value of life? We all have things to do, and sometimes it's an illusory space. So the reality of checking in with ourselves, returning to ourselves, is somewhat, should be mandatory. Finding time, finishing things off. So as I bring to this conversation to a gentle closure, we are all unfolding our stories and telling our stories as it's happening. Because in the present moment, everything is occurring right here. There's no such thing as the next moment. Everything is right here as we are happening, because some of your brains are doing their own processing in your own presence of physical space. Everything is happening in this time. So 17 years of my work in my one previous job, and even today, as I speak, and I'm giving a part of my share. When I left home to get to work, I was in my best moment, because there was a quiet space of 27-minute drive. It was just me, and sometimes I felt like the car knew where to go, where to turn, when to stop. And honestly, over 17 years, there has been many times I was like, oh, I got to work. I was not even there. I was in my space. And when I would get to work, I somewhere cultivated a practice of leaving me there at the doormat. And as I walked through the punch time, I was just there for that duration, 7, 8, 10, 12, 16 hours, whatever the demand was. So I stayed there. And when I finished, somewhere I have later on realized I was shuffle my feet at the same doorstep, and I left work right exactly where it was. And another 22 minutes of drive was zeroing myself out, picking up the needs and the responsibilities of what is waiting at home, etc. And I would pick those things up, and then I would resume life. So those that have got to know me know I don't exchange my set of life. Work stays at work. Personal life stays at personal life. And I was in the medical field, so there was a lot of space of saying you're only on need-to-know basis. You cannot share, cross-reference any conversation. So that developed over 17 years. Whatever you talk to me at work stays at work. Even if it's personal, it's personal. The nature of work that we do is also confidentiality. It calls for that little sense of commitment, honoring of that communication as it's unfolding. Whatever it is, as benign or as insignificant it is. So sessions happen, finishing off. I have the sense of zeroing myself out. It goes with whoever the person is. And most of the time I'm not even remembering what was discussed and having to talk about. Subconsciously, I picked up this practice. And it has become a great asset in the hindsight of saying, what work was supposed to be done, it happened, they took it with them, and I'm here, I am just being a warm body after the fact. It's not with me. But you have to recognize whatever may work for you. I'm sharing this because it has, somewhere in the hindsight, even if I'm talking about it, I can feel I rarely carried work home or home at work. I kept it. I do not know how it worked, but it was manageable, and I have enjoyed even today. When I walk through that door, I left myself out there. I'll pick it up when I'm done. And that's how I feel has been cultivated within me. It's my storytelling of sharing that wonderment that Spirit has provided me. It works for me, it's effective, and I get to enjoy it. But what about you? What would you cultivate for you that becomes enjoyable for the remainder of your years? If you're already on one thing, that doesn't mean that can be the only thing. It means that you made one potential good for yourself. There are many other potentials to hone into that part of you. So we live the life of infinite possibilities. So why be happy with one creation? Why not stimulate something else? So think about the thought and see how it moves you in your own unique way.